It doesn't start with a fight. It starts with a silence. Not the kind that's heavy with anger, but the kind that ends a storm. Carl Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's exactly what happens the moment an empath stops apologizing for existing. They don't announce it. They don't warn anyone. They simply vanish, not out of hate, but out of clarity. The people who once relied on their constant warmth suddenly find themselves in a cold room. They call it abandonment. But Jung would call it individuation, the soul returning to itself after years of being dispersed among others. For years, the empath carried what others couldn't handle. They became the quiet therapist in every room, the invisible healer holding everything together. They said, "I'm fine," even when they weren't, because someone else always needed more. Every argument became a chance to soothe. Every betrayal a chance to forgive. Until one day, something in them shifted. A subtle realization that love given without reciprocity isn't love, it's servitude. And so they stopped. Not dramatically, but decisively. They stopped fixing what they didn't break. They stopped carrying emotions that weren't theirs to hold. They stopped explaining pain to those who caused it. Jung called this the withdrawal of projection, the moment when consciousness takes back what it's been lending to the unconscious world. The empath who once absorbed everyone's emotions begins to see the difference between empathy and enmeshment. It's not that they stop caring. They stop confusing compassion with responsibility. For the first time, they recognized that the endless giving wasn't always pure. It was often a desperate attempt to be loved through usefulness. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, and the pain of the empath's awakening is realizing how much of their life was spent being what others needed, not who they are. Their silence doesn't arrive to punish. It arrives to protect. It's the psyche pulling its energy back to survive." Jung observed that highly sensitive individuals often live with what he called porous boundaries, thin membranes between self and other. That permeability allows them to sense pain long before words appear. But it also leaves them defenseless against the emotional projections of those who refuse to know themselves. The empath becomes the canvas for everyone else's chaos, until one day the canvas folds. It no longer receives. It reflects. The people around them feel it immediately. Suddenly, conversations end without conclusion. Apologies aren't chased. Forgiveness isn't forced. The empath stops cushioning every blow, and reality begins to echo louder in the room. To those who lived off their endless patience, this feels cruel. But Jung would say it's nature restoring equilibrium. The unconscious always seeks balance, and when one person has carried too much, withdrawal is inevitable. You can't pour from an empty vessel, and for empaths, that emptiness often looks like serenity. Behind that serenity, however, lies collapse. Years of emotional labor, absorbing, filtering, mediating, leave them spiritually dehydrated. Their exit is not a performance. It's triage. It's the soul saving itself from psychological implosion. Jung wrote that when a person's energy becomes too identified with their social role, the unconscious retaliates to restore balance. The empath's identity as the good one, the healer, the peacekeeper, eventually becomes unsustainable. When they finally drop the role, people don't just lose comfort, they lose their reflection of innocence. Because the empath's presence made everyone else look kinder than they really were. When that mirror disappears, distortion collapses. Those who relied on the empath's forgiveness now face the raw image of themselves. It's not revenge, it's revelation. You can hear it in their words. You've changed. You're different. You're selfish. But what they really mean is, you've stopped making me feel like a good person. Jung explained that projection is the mind's oldest defense mechanism. We disown what we can't accept, and we cast it onto others who seem strong enough to hold it. Empaths with their soft edges and open hearts become perfect targets. They absorb the guilt, the rage, the inadequacy that others can't bear to admit. Until the day they stop, and when they do, the psychic energy reverses direction. The shadow returns home. The once admired kind one suddenly becomes cold. The patient listener becomes distant. To the unconscious, awareness feels like betrayal, but to the empath, it's liberation. Jung said the purpose of life is to become who you truly are, and no one can do that while living as the emotional extension of someone else. That's why the quiet exit cuts so deep. It doesn't wound the body, it exposes the wound that's been hidden all along. It forces those who depended on your light to confront their own darkness. And it forces you, the empath, to meet the part of yourself that always feared being alone. Because beneath every overgiver is a child who believed that love must be earned. The exit is the adult finally telling that child, you don't have to earn it anymore. That sentence ends entire histories, and in its silence, a new life begins. They'll try to pull you back, not because they miss you, but because they miss who they were when you made them feel safe. You were their emotional gravity, the quiet force keeping their chaos from collapsing. When you leave, their world tilts. They start reaching for you with promises, apologies, nostalgia. But what they really want is equilibrium, not accountability. They want their reflection of goodness back. Jung warned that when someone begins to individuate, those still trapped in unconscious dependency will experience it as abandonment. They mistake your growth for betrayal, your peace for punishment. You'll be called distant, cold, even cruel. You'll hear that you've lost your light. But Jung would say, you're not dimming, you're differentiating. The light you use to scatter on everyone else is finally illuminating your own path, and that to those who depended on your glow feels like darkness. They don't understand that you're not rejecting them. You're rejecting the pattern that made their comfort your responsibility. Your refusal to continue the emotional contract is not cruelty, it's correction. Every time you say no without explaining, you're teaching them that your existence is not an instrument for their relief. Jung saw this same dynamic in the myth of the healer, who must eventually withdraw from the village. As long as the healer stays, the villagers remain sick because their illness keeps them connected to the source of comfort. Only when the healer disappears do they begin to cultivate their own medicine. That's what your silence does. It's not vengeance, it's initiation. Your absence forces others to grow or stay broken by their own inertia. And either outcome is justice. Inside you, though, the process doesn't feel powerful. It feels hollow. You wake up with space where people used to be. Your phone is quiet. Your energy, once spent managing emotions, now sits heavy in your chest. You wonder if you've made a mistake. Because no one warns empaths that healing often feels like loss. Jung called this the disorientation of transformation. When the old identity dissolves, the psyche grieves not for the pain left behind, but for the illusion of purpose it provided. It takes time to trust that peace can exist without performing for it. As the silence stretches, guilt begins whispering. Maybe you were too harsh. Maybe they didn't mean to take so much. Maybe if you had explained better, they would have understood. But guilt is only the shadow of old conditioning, the voice of your training to please. It's not truth. Jung believed that guilt is a sign you're stepping beyond the boundaries of your former self. It means the psyche is reorganizing. Each time you sit with that discomfort, without running back to fix things, you strengthen your center. You become less magnetic to chaos, more anchored in your own energy. Eventually, the withdrawal turns into revelation. You realize that most of your relationships weren't built on connection, but on exchange. You gave peace. They gave validation. You offered empathy. They offered dependency. Without that unconscious transaction, there's suddenly nothing left to trade. It's heartbreaking, but it's also freedom. You stop mistaking emotional labor for love. You stop interpreting exhaustion as proof of compassion. You start valuing stillness as much as presence. And in that stillness, something sacred reappears, your intuition. When you lived for others, your intuition was drowned out by their noise. Now it speaks again. It tells you who feels genuine and who feels hungry. It tells you when to give and when to guard. It tells you that not every cry for help is a call to save. Jung believed intuition was the voice of the unconscious guiding the individual toward wholeness. You start hearing it in small moments, a pull toward solitude, a gentle warning when manipulation begins, a calm certainty that not every storm deserves your attention. This is the empath's second awakening, realizing that love and rescue are not the same thing. As this awareness deepens, people respond in predictable ways. Some fade quietly, uncomfortable with your calm. Others try one last time to provoke emotion, anger, guilt, pity, anything to make you react. But reaction is the old self. Response is the new one. And so you remain silent, steady, grounded. Jung said that nothing strengthens authority so much as silence. That silence, once mistaken for weakness, becomes your shield. You don't need to prove you've changed. The absence of your old patterns speaks for itself. Then something unexpected happens. You stop missing what you left. The weight that once felt like belonging now feels like bondage when remembered. You begin to see that peace was not hiding in others' approval, but in your own alignment. For the first time, solitude doesn't sting. It feels sacred. It feels earned. You can breathe without waiting for permission. You can love without apologizing for limits. You can exist without negotiating for space. This is what Jung called the emergence of the true individual, the moment when the soul stands in its own light and doesn't flinch. There's a stillness that comes after the storm, and at first it feels unnatural. You've lived so long reacting to others' emotions that peace feels suspicious. Your mind searches for noise, expecting crisis, waiting for the next apology or explosion. But none comes. That quiet is the new terrain of your life, raw, unmarked, strange. It's not emptiness. It's space. And in that space, something begins to return yourself. Jung wrote that when the unconscious withdraws its projections, what returns is not just energy, but identity. Every feeling you once carried for others drifts back like lost fragments of a soul. You start to feel your own moods again. You laugh without needing someone else's permission. You rest without guilt. You start to notice the simple details that once blurred into the background, the warmth of sunlight, the smell of morning, the quiet hum of your own heartbeat. These are small miracles of presence. You've stopped surviving other people's stories and started living your own. Still, the old reflexes linger. You might catch yourself rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You imagine explaining, defending, clarifying. But those scripts collapse the moment you realize there's no one left to convince. Your peace doesn't require consensus. That's what Jung called the maturity of solitude, the point where validation becomes irrelevant because truth has become internal. In this stage, your empathy transforms. It's no longer an open wound. It's an instrument of discernment. You can feel others deeply without confusing their emotions for your own. You sense pain without needing to fix it. You offer presence instead of rescue. This shift is subtle but radical. You've become what Jung described as a conscious participant in your own psyche. You no longer drown in collective feeling, you navigate it. You no longer absorb, you translate. Your compassion now has edges, and those edges are love in its truest form. The world notices this shift before you do. Some people relax around you, drawn to the quiet steadiness they once overlooked. Others recoil, unable to manipulate what they can't confuse. They'll test your silence, poke at your peace, whisper that you've changed. And you'll agree you have. You're no longer addicted to proving you're good. You're simply whole. Jung observed that individuation, becoming a fully integrated self, always provokes resistance from the collective. Groups survive through conformity. Individuals threaten that balance. When you refuse to play your old role, systems that depended on your compliance begin to crumble. Families, friendships, workplaces, they'll all feel the tremor. But you can't hold up structures built on your suppression. Let them fall. What survives will be real. What doesn't was never love, it was arrangement. As you stand in this new light, grief visits again. Not for the people you lost, but for the illusion you lived inside. You see how many times you said yes when your soul whispered no. You see how many nights you calmed storms that weren't yours. You realize how much energy was spent maintaining peace that wasn't real. Jung would call this confrontation with the shadow of goodness, the reckoning with the ego's addiction to virtue. Being good kept you safe. Being real makes you free. And freedom, as Jung knew, is always bought with discomfort. Eventually, the silence stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like ownership. You walk through the same world, but from a different center. People's moods no longer dictate your worth. Their disappointment no longer defines your decisions. You don't need to defend your kindness, because it no longer feels endangered. You don't need to prove you care, because you finally care for yourself. This is the phase Jung described as psychological sovereignty. It's when empathy becomes power, not over others, but over yourself. You can enter any emotional climate and remain intact, but sovereignty comes with a paradox. The more at peace you are, the lonelier it feels at first. You'll notice how few people know how to meet without masks, how few can hold presence without performance. You'll crave depth and find it rarely. This loneliness isn't punishment. It's refinement. You're being tuned for higher resonance. Only those who have faced their own shadows will match it. The rest will call you detached, because they mistake calm for indifference. Let them. Their misunderstanding is the cost of your freedom, and freedom doesn't look dramatic. It looks like simplicity. You wake up without dread. You speak less but mean more. You no longer explain boundaries, you embody them. You no longer chase closure, you practice it. You stop trying to fix the world and start aligning with it. This quiet confidence unnerves those who once thrived on your uncertainty. They'll test it with silence of their own, hoping to make you flinch. But you won't. Because silence is your native language now. The peace you've built isn't fragile, it's forged. It came through countless moments of restraint, through the ache of not explaining, through the discipline of staying silent, when everything in you wanted to defend your heart. That silence hardened into clarity. It taught you that distance doesn't always mean disconnection. Sometimes it means devotion to yourself, to truth, to what's real. Jung believed that consciousness always begins with separation. To see clearly, one must first step back, and that's exactly what your quiet exit was. a sacred stepping back not from people but from illusion. Those who once depended on your constant giving now face themselves without the anesthesia of your empathy. It is here, right here, that the real reckoning begins. You were their mirror, reflecting their best image back to them. Now that the mirror is gone, they finally see what was always there, the need they refused to name, the darkness they projected onto you. For some, that sight will awaken something holy, a spark of self-awareness. For others, it will trigger rage, denial, blame. Both are forms of confrontation with the unconscious. Your silence simply delivered the mirror. What they do with it is no longer your burden. The empath's quiet exit, then, is not the end of compassion, it's its purification. You've stripped empathy of its dependency. You no longer give to be loved. You give because love itself moves through you freely. You no longer listen to erase tension. You listen to witness truth. You no longer forgive out of fear. You forgive because you understand. This is what Jung called the movement from unconscious goodness to conscious virtue. It's no longer reflex, it's choice. When you reach this stage, you begin to attract differently. Those who come near you will sense the boundary before you speak it. They'll feel the calm of someone who no longer negotiates their worth. They may not understand it, but they'll respect it. Some will even begin their own withdrawal from patterns, from noise, from the endless performance of being needed. Your silence becomes a contagion of healing. It travels further than your words ever could. And what about you? You'll notice that life feels smaller but richer. You'll laugh less often but more deeply. You'll cry less frequently but more honestly. Your world will narrow to what is essential, and that narrowing will feel like expansion. Because for the first time, your energy is not diffused across everyone else's crises, it's circulating within you. That inner current is strength, not armor. It doesn't defend. It sustains. It doesn't resist. It roots. You stand in the center of your being like a tree that no longer bends to every wind. One day, someone will ask where you went, why you disappeared, why you changed. You'll smile not out of pride, but peace. You'll know they wouldn't understand the answer because it can't be spoken. It has to be lived. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left to hear yourself. You left because silence was the only language that could hold your truth. And you learned that not all exits are escapes, some are evolutions. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That's what the quiet exit grants you, the privilege of wholeness. It's the moment your empathy stops being a wound and becomes wisdom. The moment you stop rescuing others and start redeeming yourself. The moment you realize that the greatest act of love is sometimes walking away without resentment, not slamming the door, not making a scene, just closing the chapter with both hands steady. The world will keep spinning. Some will learn. Some will curse your name. But none of it will reach you the same way anymore. Because you've stepped outside the orbit of unconscious expectation. You exist now in a clearer air, a place where you can breathe, feel, create, and love without collapsing. That is the true revenge of the empath, not silence but serenity. Not absence but alignment. Not punishment but peace. And when you finally stand there in that unshakable quiet, you'll understand what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Your quiet exit was that act of consciousness. It wasn't an ending. It was the moment you stopped calling pain your purpose. It was the second you chose to live fully awake. So if you're listening to this and feel that pull, the exhaustion, the clarity, the need to disappear, don't fight it. It's not weakness. It's your evolution. Let the silence come. Let it cleanse. Let it reclaim what was always yours. You don't owe the world an explanation for healing. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that keeps them comfortable. Your quiet exit is your return to the truth. And those who are meant for your light will meet you there in that still, sacred place where empathy no longer bleeds, it shines. See you in the next dimension.